gland in the human body, and the pancreas, which is part, of course, in connection with the spleen structure in its function. These various glands have a controlling or regulating action of one kind or another. Let's try and see if we can investigate them just a little more specially. Suppose for a moment we attempt to study the spleen, which is a very interesting gland. And in order to study the spleen, we make a very simple experiment. Let us take a small sheet of very thin rubber, say the size of a sheet of typing paper. And with adhesive tape, we bind this over the area of the spleen, covering the skin over the area of the spleen. If we do this, it will not be very long before we will notice some results. The reason we notice the result is that this rubber protective, which we have placed here, is cutting off certain energy rays. The spleen is like a kind of umbrella. It is almost like one of these radar devices by means of which we can pick up planes at a distance. The main difference being, of course, that the spleen is primarily concerned with picking up energy, not picking up planes. It is a receiving area into which energy flows. And this energy, reaching the spleen, begins to nourish or support the etheric magnetic field of the physical body. Thus, the spleen is associated with the energy by means of which the vital health of structure is maintained. Wherever there is debility of vital energy, something is wrong in connection with the function of the spleen. But there's no use going and trying to have this diagnosed. Almost anything else will be substituted in the diagnosis. The main fact is that unless the physician follows the Paracelsian corpus and becomes aware that the spleen becomes the gatherer of the energy which becomes the vital principle, that part of man which corresponds to the plant kingdom is sustained by the spleen. Now, the plant kingdom has the power of growth, but not the power of motion. It has the power of color, but it does not possess certain other faculties and powers, and the structure of it is quite different from that of the animal, for example. It represents a less complicated organism with less available function, but it does possess the two basic functions, namely growth and reproduction. Therefore, we must express through the spleen the basic energies necessary for growth and reproduction, and also for color distribution, which the plant has likewise achieved. If then we want to know how man as a healthy plant is proceeding, we have to realize that the growth, energization, representing the plant system comes in this area. I also very strongly suspect that this is the tie between man and what we call cycles of climate, weather, and temperature. That in this we have perhaps the field in which the actual relationship between sidereal bodies and man is set up. For here it is that the energies and the energy field of the earth continuously being modified by the positions of sidereal bodies, that this energy field enters man. Here also we have a sympathetic situation. For here we have what I believe it was our old friend Sir Kemlin Digby back in the good old days who said that sympathy belonged to this area, that the sympathies between things are carried in energy. Therefore, that compatible energies create vital sympathies. And by vital sympathies, we mean the affinities of things for each other, or the power by means of which like and like mingle. Perhaps under the heading, therefore, of sympathy, if we wanted a good example of it, we might point out the problem of blood transfusion or infusion. Slightly different in process, but not entirely different in meaning. The infusion would be closer, however, to the splenic factor. But here we have a strange blood introduced into a system. This blood must be overcome by the blood of the person, and its own vital field must be permeated by the vital field of the person receiving the blood. There must be an electric, vital, magnetic victory of the person over the strange blood which he has received. To a smaller degree, there must be also this victory of the individual over every element of food that he takes in, because he is taking in a dissimilar, which he must make similar, or he can do nothing with it. This similarity factor, this sympathy, appears to be largely under the control of the spleen. If, therefore, this becomes damaged beyond a certain degree, the individual cannot live. This is one of the indispensable parts of man. It cannot be sacrificed. In fact, for the most part, the glands cannot be totally sacrificed. There are one or two that can be, because when that occurs, if it is necessary to remove them, their burden is carried to another gland of somewhat compatible purpose, as, for example, the transference of the responsibility, mutual transference between thyroid and parathyroid. Each one can take something that is necessary if needed, and the glandular system, if deprived of a function, redistributes that function over the surviving glands, if it is possible to do so. Some, however, this cannot be done with, and anything happens to these glands, there is no answer. If the a kidney is removed, the suprarenal is generally left, because it is not possible to spare some of these glandular structures. They are too subtle. Yet we are not aware of why they are so necessary. Now, the liver is the largest gland in the body and is also probably one of the most abused. We recognize in the liver, in the apex of the great body of the liver, the great lobe, the center of, well, for our purposes, let's be rather blasé and say the center of the beast in us. This is the center of animal life. As the spleen supplies that which is necessary for the continuance of a plant, so the liver provides the extra things that are necessary for the survival of an animal. Without the liver, man as an animal can't make it. Therefore, the liver has to do with the warm blood factor by which an animal is distinguished. The liver, furthermore, has to do with motion. It has to do with motion and emotion. And the entire possibility of man as a warm-blooded creature, developing a whole pattern of emotional reactions to motion, the relationship of the entire sensory structure to the blood circulation. In other words, an animal has senses, the same as man. They are not bound by the same coordinator, but the sensory perceptions are there. The animal can see, it can hear, it can feel, it can taste, and it can smell. Particularly in the sense of smell, the animal has tremendous superiority. This superiority can only mean one thing, that in the animal, the pituitary and the liver have formed a companionship far greater than in the case of man. In man, the power of the pituitary has gradually been shifted to the pineal. And as a result of that, on many levels of function, man is less self-sustaining than an animal, perhaps even lacking certain judgment that an animal possesses in a rudimentary way. Certainly an animal can determine friendship and false friendship more quickly than man. It can also find its way home when man is totally lost. The animal does possess certain powers, and the highest power of the animal seemingly has to do with its psychic propensity, which goes back to the pituitary body. But we have man as an animal operating through a combination of glands in which the liver and the pituitary constitute dominant factors. Now, where do we find, for example, the mineral content? Man is also a mineral. Man is bone. He is substance. He is matter. He is worth about $8.50 now as pure mineral content. He used to be worth only $1.25, but minerals have gone up since those days. Also, we've discovered a couple of new elements in man that are quite expensive. So his value as merely a chemical compound is rapidly rising. Perhaps he will be ultimately a good investment. Who knows? But the mineral part of man comes back again not so much to the endocrine system as we know it, but to a degree it gives us a clue to this particular structure. Actually, the mineral part of man is linked directly to the life part. Actually, what is a mineral? A mineral is apparently a mass, a substance. That it has certain energy waves of some kind moving in it is pretty well established because of the crystallization forms which we find in the mineral. The mineral is crystallized around energy. But the mineral does not move, it does not grow, it does not reproduce as we know it, and it has only a kind of survival with the exception of certain minerals. There are links between minerals and plants in the same way that there are links everywhere in nature. But the mineral is an existing thing. It is alive, but it is not living as we know it. And this, according to the old authorities, was due to the fact that the human heart has two complete structures involved in it. An internal structure in which life is seated, and an exterior field surrounding that structure, which is the basis of the form principle. That matter is therefore held in cognizable form from the outer magnetic field of the heart. Therefore, actually, matter is not included upon in the glandulous group, even as the ancients pointed out long ago that the physical body is not a principle. The physical body is a receptacle only. It is not a principle. Upon this receptacle, 7 principles operate. But it is the 8th sphere, or the sphere of their activity. Matter, therefore, is a kind of 8th principle, directly related to life itself. The vibratory polarity of life and matter is in perfect harmony. And for that reason, the physical body is tied as a living thing to the structure of the core of the heart,